Money is a very sophisticated control system because it requires almost no energy input. People are directed by chasing money incentives, but this power through chronic overuse, when it reaches this point where no matter how much money is created, it's not translating into actual economic growth, then it goes into a financial bubble, and then you get the major collapse of the whole system. Then they must have a plan to stay in control through that collapse, which will require physical control over people through the reset, because the money control system has broken down. So this is why you have a period of terrible instability. So as we were entering the 20th century, velocity money was collapsing, then the Qing dynasty collapsed. It's a global phenomena that ended dynastic rule in China. Then in the period 1914 to 1918, the Turk-Ottoman Empire collapsed, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Russian Empire, Germany was destroyed, and the British Empire had passed its zenith and was really collapsing at that point. So it's a global collapse. And the people that controlled the banking power through that managed to stay in control. And they did it by subjugating populations. It's not about taking their money. It's not about taking their stuff, which they don't need. It's about suppression and subjugation. And that's the lesson when you look at this period in the 1930s. And that is what they have planned for this kind of a cycle again. And they've set up for it. So this plan to take all collateral globally and to collapse the system in a kind of controlled demolition where they end up controlling everything, this design was set in motion over 50 years ago. It may have had a longer planning horizon than that, but we can see actual concrete steps beginning in the 1960s with dematerialization. So when this is unfolding, this wave of insolvencies, and it creates an urgency to take the collateral, people will be terrified. They will be panicked. And we know that fear shuts down critical thinking. So people will be in panic mode. I've always been interested in what happened in the 30s because of talking about these things with my father who lived through that and what I saw happening in Cleveland when I was a boy. I'd try to talk with anyone who had lived through that time. And I asked my aunt what had happened in the 30s, and she said, well, suddenly no one had any money. And I said, what do you mean? How could that be? And she said, well, no one had any money, and even wealthy families didn't have any money. And she knew families in which their daughters had been going to private schools and they couldn't afford to go back to school. When you really look at what happened there, if you close all the banks, which is what FDR did, he suddenly literally closed all the banks, and then only certain banks were allowed to reopen, which were the ones controlled by the Fed. Well, then suddenly no one had any money. It's not hard to imagine when it's all just shut down suddenly. And then you have the problem that there was a drop in price level, drop in activity, and they kept the economic activity very suppressed for years. And I know that from family history through the 30s. My grandfather's engineering business, I know from a family letter by 1936, which was 3 years after the banks had reopened, there was still no business. 3 years later, they managed to get through this, both sides of my family, because they had no debt. People were more conservative then, but it was very difficult. Now, the other thing that happened was the Federal Reserve was set up with a kind of inevitable logic that they would have to take the gold from the public, which was, of course, the monetary asset backing everything then. So the gold of the public was confiscated under the complaint that the public was hoarding the gold. But then what did the Fed do with it? The Fed hoarded the gold and did not use it to expand credit. They kept the conditions tight. So what do we have this time around? Gold is not the underlying collateral in this system. It's all securities globally. So they will be taken under the argument that, well, we have to save these systemically vital institutions so that we can restart the economy again. How could we restart the economy if they are not protected? So that will be the reason given. And it's like a game of Monopoly where all of the pieces, all of the money on the board are pulled back to the bank, and then they say, let's start a new game. And we'll start over from the basis that we have everything and you don't. So would you like to borrow something? And this is what the CBDC, the central bank digital currency, will be. It will be very difficult for people to refuse to use it because they literally won't be able to eat. They will have an app they can download. This will be the help. This will be the cavalry riding to the rescue. Just download this app and you can load your phone with some currency to allow you to go buy milk. But every time you use that, you are actually borrowing money from them. They have you. Again, it will happen very fast. This will unfold in a very frightening crisis kind of environment, and people will have difficulty refusing. And that's why it's so important to spread this awareness of this beforehand so that people understand what is happening and so that people can become engaged in this all the way to the top of the system. It has the potential to activate very capable people all the way to the top of the system. It has the potential to unify people against this. What I tried to do with this book was to stick with things I absolutely know and to make it a kind of whole in terms of allowing one to see irrefutably the whole thing with the aim of pulling it out on the table so that everyone can have a good look at it, including the participants, including the people that are making it happen. I have the premise that this is largely being done unconsciously, that the end result of this has not really been fully understood by the participants, and that perhaps even the people at the very top of this do not understand what is about to happen, and that they will be destroyed by their own hand if they do this. So it's the result of a kind of inevitable logic that they have to control everything, that has now been taken to the ultimate degree where one can see, while it's an intelligent design, it is literally insane to actually do this because no one wants this. And that the people that have inherited this ownership layer at the very top, they did not design this. They did not put it in motion. They have allowed the juggernaut to continue. There has been no pruning in the garden. There's been no oversight. It's literally never been looked at, never been checked. It has basically run out of control unconsciously. So we have to make it conscious all the way to the top of the system. Now, another way I think about this is they study us. We have to try to imagine who we're dealing with here. So I'm getting into conjecture about this. I have known people pretty high in the system. I have this idea that people are intimidating if you have not met them. But once you've met them, you see that they are just people. And I think we have to understand these are just people. They are not lizards eating babies like potato chips. That is not helpful to think of it that way. So they are actually not particularly capable people. So there is a head of the snake, but it can't do anything alone. It is reliant on the muscle beneath the head of the snake to do everything for it. And that part of the purpose of this is to push this awareness up to that muscle. Now, what would that look like? It might look like people that control corporations that are doing all the work to implement this, that would realize when they see this that they didn't know anything about this, which means they do not actually have a place at the table. How might that affect their thinking? Could they have some interesting conversations with someone when they're asked to do something? Could they perhaps decide to withdraw participation? That kind of thing we need to happen. So we have to reach people at high levels in this system. Another principle is that there's not just one head of the snake, it's like a hydra. There are lots of heads. And if you cut one off, another one grows back. So you have to be able to show the entirety of this because they only understand one piece of it. So this is like a mirror to be able to see concisely the whole of where this is going so that you can address the many-headed hydra. You know, people consider that the CIA and all the intelligence organizations are much like that. As I said, the garden has not been pruned. There's been no oversight here. So they're all running within their missions, essentially out of control. Those people also need to be aware of where this is going. Now, there are people that are actual criminals, that are killers in this, but they are not the people running things. Actually, if the money is just cut off to these entities, it stops. I think that we're very close to this collapse being triggered. What are the indications for that? Well, most profoundly, what has been done to interest rates and where they are now and the scale of the insolvencies that are out there. They're not being discussed. They're being covered up. The only way that the financial system has not collapsed is that there is a big hidden hand injecting lots of created money directly into the financial markets, holding them up right now.